This week, the Western world, to its eternal shame, turned on Israel, yet again, unequivocally, with the risk of betraying every Jew on the planet to the murderous barbarians who seek Israel's destruction. I say the Western world, but let me be more specific. The dominant political left of the Western world, the ruling left-wing political parties of America and Australia, the Democrats of President Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken and Chuck Schumer, and the Australian Labor Party of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong, along with the ruling left-wing cultural elites of Hollywood and our very own ABC, have chosen to support those who are persecuting Jews. Let me spell this out, as I've done for many years now, accurately, as it turns out. If you support the modern left, you are no supporter of Israel. If you support the modern left, you are in danger of supporting those who intimidate and harass Jews across the world and those who call for the annihilation of the Jewish people. That is the only conclusion that I can draw from the events of the past 7 days. The week began badly on Monday, Australian time, at the Oscars, with the disgusting speech by Jonathan Glazer, a British film director. Glazer's film is about a Nazi officer, Rudolf Höss, who lives a life of comfort inside the bubble of his opulent home, while outside, behind the walls, the gas chambers of Auschwitz are doing their filthy, murderous work, killing Jews. Seemingly unaware of the irony, Glazer, who seems to live in an opulent Hollywood bubble, which also chooses in the main to ignore the ongoing horrors of Hamas's murderous, evil, barbaric hostage-taking campaign of October 7th, and the equally sadistic and barbarous rape, dismemberment and murder of Jews, chose the platform of the Oscars to, quote, refute his Jewishness. How the butchers of Hamas, let alone the ghosts of Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Eichmann, must have chortled with laughter in response to Glazer's grotesque remarks. A group of survivors of the Holocaust wrote an open letter to Glazer, including the following sentences, and I'm quoting here. I am 94 years old and the only member of 105 souls in my family to survive the Holocaust. I miraculously survived nearly 3 years in the hell of Auschwitz and 1 year in the hell of Buchenwald. I watched in anguish on Sunday night, that was the Oscars, when I heard you use the platform of the Oscars ceremony to equate Hamas's maniacal brutality against innocent Israelis with Israel's difficult but necessary self-defense in the face of Hamas's ongoing barbarity. I'm quoting now, you made a Holocaust movie and won an Oscar, and you are Jewish. Good for you, says the writer. But it is disgraceful for you to presume to speak for the 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children who were murdered solely because of their Jewish identity. And it is disgraceful for you to presume to speak for those of us who personally saw the world stand silent as our mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles and cousins were murdered. We actually had nowhere to go, no possible place of refuge. No country would accept us, even though world leaders knew full well that thousands of Jews were being murdered every day. There was no Jewish nation to which we could flee. He goes on, you should be ashamed of yourself for using Auschwitz to criticize Israel. Glazer was, of course, applauded by the lovies, the left-wing cultural elites of Hollywood. And I reiterate, this is the leftist mindset, the modern left, making Holocaust movies and winning awards for showing empathy for the dead Jews of the past, but at the same time ignoring similar horrors being perpetrated against Jews in the present. We've seen the same vile hypocrisy, there's no other word for it, in the way the modern feminist movement has similarly virtually completely ignored the most disgusting assault on femininity in modern history, the rapes of living and dead Jewish women on October 7th. Here is author Batya Sagan explaining how this sick mindset works.
It goes beyond that to the core of leftist ideology, which is built on a belief system that has erased the difference between right and wrong. Now, this belief system is one you will know well if you have been to a university in the last 40 years, or an American newsroom, or on TikTok, or in a meeting with any cultural institution in America, or any progressive organization, including any liberal Jewish organization, or if you're on the board of a museum, or even in a writer's room in Hollywood. This woke worldview absolutely dominates the left, which means it dominates the cultural and intellectual output of the United States these days, rendering all people, for example, who they see as people of color, powerless and oppressed, and thus virtuous, and all white people powerful oppressors who are inherently evil and compromised. His act was her fault, and her suffering does not release her from the burden of her status as oppressor, even in death. That is why leftist feminists cannot side with raped Israeli women. To do so is to betray everything they believe. They truly see the Israeli women as deserving of everything that happened to them and having brought it on themselves. Like the conservatives of yore who blamed rape on the miniskirt worn by the victim, the left today blames the fact that Israel has more power than Hamas for everything Hamas does. They simply cannot think their way out of seeing Hamas as virtuous, because to do so would be to admit that their entire worldview is not only wrong, but is disgusting.
I share her frustration, the modern left. The reason that calls for a ceasefire are so obscene, and why any letting up in the war on Hamas is morally putrid, is that the leaders of Hamas have repeatedly made it crystal clear that they intend to carry out those barbaric murders, rapes, beheadings until every Jewish woman, man, and child is dead. So let me reiterate. If your left-leaning ideological way of thinking has you seeing any moral equivalence between the evils of Hamas and the self-defense actions of the Israeli Defense Force, you are simply incapable of telling right from wrong. Maybe time to sit down and take a long, hard look at your ideology. Calls for a ceasefire ramped up during the week from all the usual left-wing entities, including protests in Brussels. Here's another brave woman, the Belgian member of the new Flemish party in the European Parliament, Asita Kanko, explaining why a ceasefire must and cannot take place.
Calling just for a ceasefire is to a certain degree saying to Hamas, well, you can try it again tomorrow. Dear colleagues, I am strongly convinced that there will be no prospect for peace, security, stability, and prosperity for Gaza, as well as for Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation, as long as Hamas and other terrorist groups will play any role in the Gaza Strip. I support the continuation of humanitarian aid entering Gaza by road, air, and sea, and stress that it must reach those civilians in need, not Hamas, not UNRWA. The disbursement of aid has to be organized in such a way that chaotic scenes and Hamas taking over aid convoys and redirecting aid to its own fighters are prevented. EU funds, which in the past were provided to the UNRWA, should in the future be given to the UN Development Programme, UN Refugee Agency, and the World Food Programme. Stop fueling Hamas. For the sake of the Palestinian people, for the sake of the Jewish state, for the sake of global peace and security, Hamas must end.
What a wonderful woman. The difference with our own political leaders here is breathtaking.